Hi, welcome. My name is Charlotte Bismuth, and I'll be teaching this course about fact-checking. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I started my career investigating allegations of police misconduct for the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board. After attending Columbia Law School, I worked in a New York City law firm for approximately 4 years, where I did a lot of document review, but also some depositions and pro bono work. I joined the Manhattan DA's office, where I spent 7 years, first as an appellate attorney, writing briefs and arguing cases in front of a panel of judges, and then trying felony narcotics cases. My specialty was prescription drug crimes. I have since published a book. I am an activist working with families of overdose epidemic victims. And over the past 20 or so years, I've also raised 4 children. So fact-checking is a big part of my life. I want to start by reassuring you, you already know how to do this. Fact-checking is actually something that we do every day, all the time. Whenever you decide to actually unconsciously, whenever you believe something or decide to put your trust in someone, you have been going through a process of verification and corroboration in your mind to sort of read the signals and decide whether or not you can trust in that person and what they're telling you. So this is just what we do. The difference here is that we're going to really isolate that skill. We're going to break it down, and we're going to try to perfect it a little bit. Talking about some best practices, we're going to work through a simple example, and I really want to teach you how to be conscious and methodical about it and come out of this webinar thinking like a fact checker. This is a general introduction to fact-checking, so I'm addressing those of you out there who are starting out as professional fact-checkers, journalists, novelists, nonfiction authors, or freelance editors who maybe you've had an experience coming across a manuscript that raised a couple of red flags. So this is not a specialized course. What we're going to be doing is trying to get you to think like a fact checker, to isolate the mindset and a couple of practical skills that you can apply. And, again, the genre really matters. Your role really matters. All those things are going to make a difference in what you fact check, how much you fact check, and how you fact check it. But in the end, these basic skills will really apply no matter what your level of specialization is. Fact-checking is a mindset and it is a practice. Now, in terms of the mindset, I want you to be flexible, skeptical, and determined. Flexible not in the sense that you're willing to accept any fact as long as it's pretty much right. I want you to be flexible as a reader in the sense that when you're going through a manuscript, you can zoom in and out, thinking about the big picture, the premise, the underlying assumptions, as well as the facts, the dates, the names, etc. Skeptical because I want you to err on the side of being over-inclusive. When you're going through that manuscript, highlighting what you are going to try to confirm, there may be some things that others would assume don't matter, but anything that can be questioned, you should be marking. And determined, of course, because you have to take the process all the way through to the end. If you open up an inquiry on any particular fact or phrase, you've got to get to the end of that, even if it's a brick wall, and letting the author know that you are unable to confirm and working with them to see what, if anything, they need you to do next. Now, in terms of the practice, your key attributes there are methodical, clear, and professional. Now, you're going to set yourself up with your digital workspace, which is increasingly the norm, though I understand that some people may prefer to work in paper, but we're going to talk about organizing your digital workspace and proceeding through the manuscript in page order with all your tools at the ready. You're going to question every fact equally and submit every fact to the same thorough vetting process. You're going to be very clear. So when you try to confirm a fact or contact somebody, you're going to state your purpose clearly and be very direct and efficient. And then you're always, of course, going to remain professional. None of this is personal. You're not questioning the author's credibility or the credibility of any of the sources that you'll be speaking to. You're simply making sure that everything is accurately represented in this manuscript. So just one note on that. You have to be very honest about your findings. And that's as much being honest with yourself as with your client. So you really never want to settle, right? That's part of the mindset and also the practice. You just don't stop until you're done. And most importantly, you're going to document everything. What's at stake, of course, is credibility. It's your credibility as a professional, a credibility that, for instance, even if you're not a fact checker and you're a freelance editor, will only be enhanced if in the process of your work you flag to the author that you're working with, hey, there are a couple of issues that I think you might just want to get checked out, and they would be so grateful to you if you saved them, future correction or any kind of awkwardness. So it's, of course, the author's reputation, but I want you to keep in mind that your credibility as an author is not determined by whether you have any factual errors in your manuscript. Everybody can make a mistake, right? An honest mistake in good faith. Your credibility is going to be determined by how you handle that, and that means being willing to outsource the fact checking to an independent professional, or if you are cost sensitive, doing it yourself in a very thorough and impartial way to the extent possible. And then, of course, it's going to depend on how you decide to handle your findings and whether or not you're willing to really update your work and keep it accurate, even if it costs you some effects of style or, suspense in your nonfiction structuring. The accuracy and the facts have to come first. And remember, your reputation is everything. Let's talk about some of the best practices. One of the first rules of fact-checking, and a great way of working generally, is to set a very clear scope of work. So in that spirit, let me just make a quick note about the scope of this seminar. This is not a specialized course. This is an introduction to fact-checking. So just be aware that investigative journalists, for instance, or certain publications may be bound by very specific rules about how you confirm certain facts. So, for instance, how you confirm a quote. You want to make sure that you know what the guidelines are and that you adhere to them. I am not going to be going into those details, though I can point you to some other resources. Okay, now, as a fact checker, you're going to set a clear scope of work with your client. We're going to talk about that in a little bit more detail later. You will take nothing for granted. So you're not going to settle for, an article in a reliable newspaper and the way that they spell the name. You're not going to assume that the author, checked the spelling of the main location in their fiction or nonfiction work. You don't take anything for granted. You are the author's backup. You are their safety net. So you really want to come at it with the mindset that you're just going to try to flag everything without judgment and make sure that it's all right. Now, most importantly, you're going to commit or you're going to exit. And that means that if you commit, you have to do it thoroughly and you have to do it completely until you reach the end of the process, right? Now, you can come across certain issues like you may find that the manuscript has a lot of factual errors or a lot of placeholders for facts. And in that case, you have to be clear with your client you know, you don't have the possibility of completing the job at the moment, and that's okay. You may also have ethical issues with the client. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But the point is, just be clear. Committing may also mean stepping out of your comfort zone, or rather expanding your comfort zone, because you are going to have to make some phone calls, ask direct questions, and be very honest and transparent with yourself if you're fact-checking your own work, or with your client if you're a professional fact-checker. And just remember, it's not personal. When you're making cold calls, there's no point in worrying about whether it's embarrassing or not, because it's over in just a few minutes, and it's for the purpose of your job. And with authors, it's always best to give that clear, simple, direct feedback, and that actually is what keeps the exchange professional. A few important questions to discuss with your client. The first is, what is the genre of the manuscript that you're working on? So today we don't just have fiction and nonfiction, there also are genres in between. So for instance, there may be a slightly fictionalized memoir, or recently there was a biography published of a tech celebrity that explicitly admitted that it was, intentionally a sort of dramatized version of the truth. So in that case, the author is being very transparent and very intentional, and probably had a complicated protocol with their fact checker, but it worked for them. And the point is that as long as you know what the expectations are and you deliver what you promise to the audience and to your publisher, then you have to be on the same page about that, and that's good. So again, the scope, setting a clear scope of work. So that means specifically, are you fact-checking the entire manuscript, or are you fact-checking just a category of facts? So for instance, an author may say, I only want you to check the spelling of the names. I only want you to confirm the direct quotes. Or I only want you to focus on this particular legal proceeding that I talk about in chapter 3 and make sure that I describe it accurately. So those things will really matter. You want to find out how your author conducted their research, what kind of materials they used, how you can access those materials. So where are they? What are they? Recordings, transcripts, interview notes. Part of this is a conversation that you should have when you're considering whether or not to take on the job, just because, some of you may have more flexibility than others in the kinds of materials that you're willing to work with or that you have time to work with. But you really want to have an open conversation with the author about that and make sure that they can grant you as much access as possible. That includes names and phone numbers, so that you can call people and ask them how to spell their name, and if they really said what they said, and not have to contact the author every day for new information. You also want to talk about cost sensitivity and deadlines, because that's going to have an impact on the scope of your work and how well you can do it. If your client is cost sensitive, it may not be realistic to think that you can do a in-depth, completely broad fact check of an entire long nonfiction manuscript. Similarly, if they're on a short deadline. So there you have to, again, define with them what you think you can and can't do, and make sure that you both have aligned expectations. And then finally, you should have a conversation about what happens after you fact check. So what's the process for making sure that the changes are inputted? Are you doing that? Is the author going to do that? And as long as you start out the process with the confidence that your work is going to be incorporated and that the work will meet your standards for accuracy, proceed. And we'll talk about what happens otherwise. As an author or a client, and you'll hear me say this a lot, you want to document everything. So document your research when you're writing the book, even if it means extensive endnotes that you will pare down or delete later. Make sure that you facilitate your fact checkers access to your materials. Be transparent with your fact checker about what you're not sure about, placeholders that you might have used, places where you have written more of an opinion or an impression than a direct observation. And again, don't take it personally. You are hiring this fact checker to vet your manuscript, and you really want them to be able to come to you and be honest about every little issue that they see, because ultimately they're doing you a huge favor. And of course, they're doing their job. At the risk of repeating myself, err on the side of being over-inclusive. Make sure you separate the issues so each fact or phrase that you check may have a number of layers within it that you're going to need to go through, and you need to make sure to separate each one, and we're going to give you an example of that in a couple minutes. Make sure you see the difference between the fact and the premise. So again, any underlying assumptions or context for the book, you want to make sure that you check that as well. Sometimes it's much harder to see those mistakes than the dates or the misspelled names. And again, document everything. I beg you, document everything. I like to work in Google Drive. Some people like Dropbox. Either way, you're going to create a duplicate copy of the manuscript. You're going to, save as. That's going to be your working copy. Even if it's your working copy, you're not going to want to overload it. So you will do your highlights, and you'll do minimal comments or footnotes that say, for instance, confirm this date, confirm this quote. So clearly indicating what you are going to work on, but you don't want to overload that manuscript so that you really get lost in a thicket of details about the sources you checked or your findings, etc. So you want to label that draft clearly so that no one can mistake it for something else, and keep it legible. But then you're going to have a separate spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet will really be your tracker and the place where you document all of your process. This is a sample template that I would use as a spreadsheet. So you're going to have your page number, obviously, the line number. That's something that you can add to a working copy if you want to. You may also be able to hyperlink back to that particular phrase or fact, but maybe you prefer line number or it's a good backup. Then you're going to describe the issue that you need to confirm. Is it the spelling of a name? Is it a date? Be very specific. Separate them out. So you're going to do a separate entry for each separate issue that you need to confirm. Then you're going to list, hyperlinking if you can, the sources that you consulted. If you made phone calls and those phone calls were recorded, keep in mind that in certain states you need consent to do that. You can upload those recordings and hyperlink to them. Then you're going to have your comments and questions. You can give your client or author access to this spreadsheet so that you can engage in conversation with them here without going through emails all the time, or you can choose to keep this spreadsheet really for yourself until you turn it over to your client at the end, and do either daily, weekly email updates to your clients with all of your questions relating to a particular section or chapter. That's for you and your client to decide. And then, of course, your status. Is it yet to be confirmed? Is it pending? Are you waiting for a phone call back? Or is it completed and confirmed? Does it need to be updated in the text? Feel free to color code. Okay, so now we're going to work on a very simple example. The premise for my example, you're going to imagine that this is a nonfiction book being written about a recent news story. So in 2022, Lake Mead in Nevada, or actually it's Nevada and Arizona, hit historic lows because of the drought. And as a result, several sets of human remains were found and investigated. So really in terms of the premise, I think an example of the sort of big picture question or fact-checking question that you have when you're starting on this manuscript is, give yourself a big picture understanding of these 3 different cases of human remains being found. Make sure you know which one your author intends to write about, and make sure that you're helping the author keep the distinctions clear. So sometimes, when you're working as a nonfiction author in a context where there are a lot of similar stories or issues, it's very easy to get confused and bring in a name or a character. So that's the kind of sort of big picture verification, even if it seems really obvious, that you should be doing. But anyway, onward to our example. All right, here is our very simple example. Some of you may see more than I have put in red text as facts that need to be checked. Fair enough, but I'm really trying to just give you a quick overlook of the types of issues that you might be working with. So the first thing we're going to talk about is name. So Ella Mackenzie, you want to make sure, of course, that this was in fact the person who was involved in the case that your author is working on, and then you're going to check the spelling. You will check the spelling of Ella, and also Mackenzie. There are a lot of potential tricks in there. Is it MC instead of MAC? Is the K capitalized? That can only be resolved by a call. And hopefully with Ella Mackenzie herself, she is still available. And then, of course, gender attribution. So you'll notice that some of the gender attributions here are by the author, and others, actually one, is within a quote. So again, keeping in mind that there might be a specialized rule about how you're going to confirm a quote. It's one thing if a speaker makes a mistake in gender attribution in their sentence, and you need to respect that because that's how they said it, or if it's a mistake imported by your author. So how do you check something like the spelling of a name or a quote? Well, you're going to have to call the person. I know cold calling is really intimidating, especially for those of us who have become really accustomed to texting or emailing, but there's really no substitute for it. It is the most reliable way to confirm a fact. And I don't want you to worry about whether the call is awkward or what they might think of you. It doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is that you do the job that you've been asked to do, and that you do it well. So you're going to make that call, introduce yourself. Hi, I'm so-and-so. I've been hired to fact check this piece. Be clear about your purpose. Have your bullet point list of what you need to ask that person. Miss Mackenzie, could you please confirm the spelling of your name? Have them spell it out. Talk about gender identification, how they wish to be identified in the piece. Ask about the make of their car. Ask about the quote in the appropriate manner, and any other items that you may have for them. Ideally, you will have your list for every person before you start reaching out to them, as complete as can be. Let's talk about the gender attribution for the sheriff for a moment. So what if you know from the basic education that you've given yourself about these incidents that there was a female law enforcement officer at the scene, but that it was a National Park Service officer and not a sheriff? So this is a case where the word sheriff is actually going to contain a couple of different facts, or be related to a couple of different facts that you're going to check. You want to check that there was, in fact, a sheriff at the scene, that it was, in fact, the sheriff who interacted with the witness, Ella Mackenzie, at this moment in the action, that the sheriff was the one taking notes, the way that they were taking notes, and then, of course, are we sure that it wasn't the National Park Service officer? If there does seem to be confusion about that, it's possible that a news report may have made a mistake, or that there may have been a mistake at some level of interpretation. So again, as always, that's why we always begin with the primary materials: video recordings, news photos, news footage, audio interviews, etc. But you really, really want to confirm these details and the layers of facts within even just one word. Now let's talk about topography. So the author is telling you that we're in a parking lot and that Ella Mackenzie can see the water from her parking lot. or from her car in the lot, but also the author is telling you that the interaction between the sheriff and Ella Mackenzie occurred in the parking lot. So again, you've got several layers of facts to confirm. And as it happens, there are a lot of parking lots around Lake Mead. So this is an instance where you are checking a number of primary sources, confirming with Miss Mackenzie, confirming with the law enforcement official. You may also want to contact the National Park Service, have them, ask them if they're willing to take a picture for you, or go together on Google Maps or Google Earth and make sure that what you're looking at is accurate and that that in fact they were together in a parking lot that has a view of the water. So let's talk about making that call to the National Park Service, for instance. A couple of different scenarios that you can encounter. First of all, nobody picks up. Call again. Try to contact maybe a central office and see if they can get in touch with them. Otherwise, you're going to, do some digging around and go back to your author. If you get somebody on the phone, but they are not willing to help you or don't have the time to help you, you're going to ask when might be a better time, or if there's somebody else who might have time to help you. And, be firm but polite. It's my job to make sure that these facts are represented accurately, and it involves the National Park Service, and I'd be really grateful for your help. Another scenario is that sometimes you get somebody on the phone and they want to revise what they said or retract it or talk about something completely different, and that's not what you're there for. So again, that's a gentle reminder. Thank you so much. I can flag that for the author. My job is really to confirm this fact. Now, of course, if you hear something like, well, none of that really happened, you're going to report it immediately to the author. But, you have your scope of work, and you're just going to keep it simple and be thorough in the range that you're supposed to be in. So if you remember with sheriff, we had a couple of different complicated issues. So is the sheriff the female law enforcement official? How did they take notes? Was it their role to interact with the witness, etc.? The coroner's office and the van is very different. Now, coroner is not a generic term. There's actually a really important difference between a coroner and a medical examiner, and sometimes we tend to toss those words around as though they are the same. But here, you're not really interested and you're not out to check what role the coroner's office, if any, had in the investigation of these human remains. What you really need to know is, do they have vans? Are those vans marked? And are those vans marked in a way that would allow a civilian to identify it as being from the coroner's office? So an easy first step here is to go to the website. Not very helpful. Clark County, Nevada, they actually call it the Office of the Coroner/Medical Examiner, so that's not really going to give you a clue about how they mark their vehicles. But, again, phone number, email address. If you can't find the information, or the information you find still raises some questions, you can always call them. And as it turns out, there are some images on Google of the Clark County, Nevada Coroner's Office vehicles, but there are still a couple of questions that these images raise that you would call the coroner's office to confirm. So I would call this an SUV, not a van. You can check that, but more importantly, is this photo accurate? Does it represent the type of vehicle that they had at the time of the incident? So this looks like a pretty new car. Is the emblem still the same? Or was it, more importantly, what did it say if they did have a different vehicle at the time of the incident? But it is, if indeed you get confirmation that they had this car at the time, that's the car that they would have dispatched, and that's the same emblem, then it is reasonable that somebody on the scene, a civilian or a witness, would have looked at this car and understood that it was from the coroner's office. So you see how something like a law enforcement title can either have a simple fact to check or a series of facts that you need to check. Now, one thing I want to warn you about with fact checking is the danger of rabbit holes. Could you, if you wanted to, lose yourself for hours in the Clark County, Nevada statutes defining the duties of medical examiners versus coroners and their qualifications and how they're appointed, etc.? Yes, you could. Yes, you could. But that would cost you time, it would cost you money, and that is something that you have to save for leisure reading if you're interested. Again, as always, document your process. So those phone calls that you've made to Miss McKenzie, to the National Park Service, to the coroner's office, you want to document each one of those calls. Ideally, with consent, you record them. You've got that audio file saved and linked, and you are confident that your author, without speaking to you, can look through that spreadsheet and be confident that you have taken, not only really taken those steps, but taken them, each of the steps all the way to the conclusion and reached a determination about whether the finding is confirmed or the fact is confirmed, unconfirmed, or cannot be confirmed. So we mentioned the situation where the manuscript is just not ready to be fact-checked. There are too many placeholders or too many mistakes, and it's beyond the scope of your work, and you need to have a conversation with your client about coming back to you once they've done a little more research. But what if you come across something more troubling, like a pattern of mistakes that seem to carry a bias, and you're questioning whether your work will be taken into account and whether you want to be associated with this book. So the first thing I would say is, aren't you glad you documented everything? It protects everyone. And then I want you to consider Hanlon's razor, which is a principle. If you fact check it, you'll find that it was possibly misattributed or the name Hanlon was misspelled, but setting that aside for a moment, rabbit hole alert. The principle is never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by neglect. So you're going to have a good faith conversation with your client. I've come across these series of issues. You can isolate them one by one, and hopefully your client will understand. Otherwise, you spell out the implication for them. Taken all together, my concern is that these create the suggestion of blank, and then you're going to see how your client reacts. But you want to be very, very direct and very clear with them. And if you don't get the answer that you need to feel comfortable and like you are ready to continue being associated with this project, again, be direct and be decisive. So that means, I'm so sorry if I don't have the assurance that my findings will be taken into account, then this is not a project that I can continue to work on. Or, I understand that you decided not to make some of the changes, and in this case, I would ask that you please not acknowledge my work on this book or associate me with the published work. If you're fact-checking your own work as an author, don't fire yourself. We all make mistakes. Learn from those mistakes. So you can set yourself up for success in a couple of ways. I like to try to trick my brain. I print everything out. I go to a different room or a different place, a public library or something, with a different color pen and try to approach the manuscript as a fresh reader, as a new reader. So you want to create that distance. Don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt. So, you're looking at a fact and you're like, oh, there's so many. Oh, but wait, I really checked this one out. Or I can't remember where I put it, but I'm sure that I saw that picture of the coroner's office van. You can't cut any corners, especially for your own work. Actually, all the time. You can't cut any corners. You have to go back to those original primary source materials. And again, you know what I'm going to say. Document everything. That's all we have time for today, but I just want to point you to two really, really good books. The first by Elizabeth George. If you're a novelist, I would highly recommend it to learn about sort of the nitty-gritty of conducting research or scouting locations and the kind of information that you want to accumulate and document during the writing of the book that will set yourself or your fact checker up for success. And then for professional fact checkers, journalists, nonfiction authors, there is really no better guide than the Chicago Guide to Fact Checking. It's updated. Brooke Burrell has done an extraordinary job on it. It's very detailed, and you can keep it on your bedside table and read it at your leisure whenever you want to. Thank you so much, and good luck to you.